Welcome to the Delphi Bootcamp. 5 days of introducing you to using the Delphi Starter Edition to learn how to develop applications using FireMonkey for Windows. We've got a full week of sessions. Here's the URL to the agenda for each day. embt.co/2016 Delphi Camp. Here's the agenda for each day of the Delphi Bootcamp. This is day one, your introduction to using Delphi, the IDE, the compiler, and building your first FireMonkey applications. On day two, we'll show you how to do more with the Delphi programming language. Day three, how to use FireMonkey to build great-looking and effective user interfaces. Day four, we'll cover game application development with FireMonkey using Delphi language. And on the final day, we'll give you a glimpse of what you can do if you upgrade from the Starter Edition to Pro or Enterprise and above, allowing you to do multi-device development, doing database development, multi-tier development, and mobile development. And again, a reminder, the short URL is at the bottom of the screen, which gives you links to each of the day's information. And for each of the presentations, there's a separate blog post with additional links to information. I'm David Intersimony, or David I. I'm going to introduce day one to you and introduce using Delphi development, showing you the IDE, building FireMonkey applications, setting up your environment, and getting you started. And then the other instructors will continue throughout the week. Just a reminder, that short URL takes you to the Delphi Bootcamp landing page where you can see the different instructors, your trainers for the week. Myself, David I, Jim McKeith, Marco Cantu, Eli M., and some other guests as well. And again, here each day is the agenda for each of the weeks. We're doing 6 a.m. and 11 a.m. each day. Down at the bottom is the registration link, which allows you to download and get a free copy of the Delphi Starter Edition license. That's available until the end of the Delphi Bootcamp, or September 9th. Also being part of the bootcamp and registering your Delphi Starter Edition, you'll get access to Marco Cantu's Object Pascal book. Here's the Starter Edition page. It's very simple. Just put in your username and password, or if you haven't logged in or you're not logged into the developer network, then it'll ask you for a little bit of additional information and to create a developer network account. And then it will email you the license key for Delphi Starter Edition. And you can click to download the installer, which is our feature-based installer. It's a very small download, and then it grabs additional files as needed as part of the installation. And as I mentioned, the Marco Cantu handbook, when you're logged into your developer network account, you can go and download the PDF. It's an ebook version of Marco's latest edition of the Object Pascal handbook. And when you download it, you get this zip file. When you unzip it, you get the Object Pascal handbook, which has been updated for 10.1 Berlin. And it's a PDF by Marco Cantu. And here it'll again take you through the programming language Object Pascal with lots of samples and information and tips about how you can learn the power of the programming language. So on day one, I'm going to make sure that you've got the Starter Edition installed using the feature installer. Do an overview and show you different parts of the development environment. Create an application. Talk a little about some of the differences between the Windows-only VCL or Visual Component Library and FireMonkey. Using the Object Inspector, the debugger, setting up your environment, what the Starter Edition lets you do, some runtime library features like IOUtils for processing through directories on different versions of Windows. And if you get to multi-platform, then how it works on the different platforms as well. We'll take a look at the parallel programming library using Delphi to give you responsive user interfaces in your FireMonkey applications when you're doing multi-threaded or long-running operations in your code. And then we'll look at some of the options that are available inside the IDE for configuring and enhancing and extending the IDE itself. And at the end, we'll have time for questions. So all the way through, using the GoToWebinar interface, you can queue up questions, and the Bootcamp team is available throughout this presentation to answer your questions, and we'll cover all of those at the end during the live Q&A. So once you've filled out the information in the Delphi Starter Edition registration page, you'll get a key emailed to you. You'll have a developer network account, and it will also have the link for how you can download the feature-based installer. The feature-based installer is about 200 megabytes to start, and then depending on the options you choose, it'll grab additional files along the way. So when we start up the feature-based installer, you've got this user account control for Windows. I'm using Windows 7 here. You can also run on Windows 10, even the latest edition, the anniversary edition. So here we'll just say, yes, we agree to the license agreement. You can look at it. It talks about the license agreement for Delphi, C++ Builder, and Rad Studio. In this case, I'm going to have a key, which is the key for the Starter Edition. And now it's asking for the serial number that we emailed you when you registered for the bootcamp and said that you wanted to download and get a Delphi Starter Edition. If there are those of you out there that already have keys for 10.1 Berlin, for Rad Studio or Delphi, then you'll already have those keys maybe registered and installed, and you can just use your Pro Enterprise Architect Edition. And for me, I've got a starter key that I've downloaded, so I'm going to grab that and put that in the serial number and then click register after I put in my EDN username and password. And then once I've put in my serial number and registered or logged into my EDN account, okay, and so now because I've put in a Starter Edition key, it says I've got the Delphi Win32 Starter Edition, and we can select that platform. It's the only platform that's available for Starter Edition. If you upgrade to Pro and Enterprise, then you'll have additional support for things like Win64. If you have the mobile add-on pack or the Enterprise Edition, then you get the mobile platforms for iOS and Android, and you get Mac OS as well. So we can go in here and click the install part. It also tells us the extra download that is needed, how much disk space is going to be used, and the download time for doing the Starter Edition. So we'll hit continue. One other option here is that we can specify additional language files for the IDE. So if you're in French-speaking parts of Canada or you're elsewhere in the world, you can install the French language, German language, or Japanese language pack. Then you can also choose to install the samples and the help. And so I'll choose those two options, and you notice the download size has gotten a little larger and the download time a little bit more because of the samples and help files and so on. Now it's about 1.6 gig. You can always choose to use the online DocWiki, docwiki.embarcadero.com, to get to the Delphi online help, or you can have a local copy of the help as well. And now it's downloading the pieces and parts that are required as part of doing Delphi Starter Edition development for either Windows only or FireMonkey. So it's downloading DirectX. FireMonkey uses DirectX under the covers on Windows to do 3D graphics and to do GPU-based computing. So that gets installed. A few other bits like the redistributable parts of Interbase, some of the core files, Glyphics, which is a set of icons or bitmaps and buttons that you can use in your applications. That gets installed as well. And then the core common files that are part of Starter Edition. So we'll just let this run for a while and then come right back and continue with day one, Intro to Delphi in the Delphi Bootcamp. Okay, when the feature installer completes, we can start working with the IDE. So we'll just click Start Working. And now we'll have the IDE installed. And now we're in the IDE itself. We can choose the help about Embarcadero Delphi. And it tells us that I'm using the Berlin edition and that the product license status is registered as a Starter Edition. A few things about the environment. File Tools Options allows us to look at many different options that are available as part of the IDE. Some settings for the object inspector. You can define colors, for the object inspector to match things that you're used to, for example. There's the tool palette. You can specify colors here, a modern color scheme. There's this rainbow color scheme. You'll see down here what it might look like. We can go into some of the editor options. So I know when we're on the GoToWebinar system, some people have issues with the size of the code editor fonts. I like to use the Lucida Console 14. That's a pretty nice sized a font that shows up real well in these screencasts here. For version control, you can choose key mapping. So if you use two different programmers editors, you can choose those Emacs or Brief or Visual Studio key settings for hotkeys. Code Insight is our system for looking ahead as you're starting to type variables or function names and parameters and so on. And you can set that delay property if you don't want that popping up immediately. I like to have it show up right in front of me to help me move along in my code editing. Also, we have these code templates, so I can do code template work, and we'll see that inside the code editor in a little bit. We support 3 different version control systems, support Git, Mercurial, and Subversion. Subversion is installed by default, and it's the one that's built in, but you can choose these other 2 as well. Our Get It package manager is used to look for updates that we might push out to a backend server to come up into your IDE, so you can make sure that's set to get updates automatically. If you're doing HTML document editing inside the IDE, you can set up those options as well. You can also set up different debug options. We'll show the debugger here in a little bit. Those are some of the top level settings. One other one I want to show you is the environment variables option. We set up some environment variables as part of the install, so the path to the development environment, so you can just start that from a command prompt or start it from a shortcut. We have the path statement here for system variables, and then you can override any of those variables. So the path statement, for example, here has the Embarcadero Studio 18.0 bin and the BPL for the package libraries for DLLs and such. You can override that as well to set up and add your own paths inside the IDE to have an override versus what is available on the Windows instance that you're running the IDE on. There's file associations that you can set up and such. So there's lots of things to do here inside of the tools options. We'll take a look at a few more things here. There are also other tools in the tools menu. Manage platforms, you'll get involved in that if you move up to the Pro Enterprise Edition mobile add-on pack, where you can specify the paths to different target platforms that the compilers that we give you for those platforms that run on the compilers, and the tool chain runs under Windows, but you can manage the platforms. You can set up build tools, and you can also add your own tools to this tools menu using the configure tools option if you want to have some other executables available while you're inside the IDE. You can add new components and install components. So you can install packages. That's beyond the focus of this bootcamp week, but component development is a big part of the power of doing Delphi development, both with FireMonkey and with the VCL environment. All right, so let's just get started and say File New. We have 2 different options here in File New. Bring up a VCL Forms. That's a Windows-only. VCL is a framework across over the top of the Windows API across different versions of Windows. But this bootcamp week, we're going to be focused on doing FireMonkey development, which will lead you to the world of multi-platform, multi-device, mobile, and so on. So we don't say FireMonkey here. We just say multi-device application Delphi, and we'll choose that option. We have 2 choices here in the Starter Edition: build a 2D or a blank form application, or build a 3D application. We'll take a look at it, maybe 3D later. Also, FireMonkey's covered quite a bit on day 3. So let's just start building our first simple FireMonkey application. One way to know that there's a FireMonkey application versus a VCL application is over in the project manager. If you expand underneath the unit source code for your code unit, if it's got .fmx, that says it's a FireMonkey form description file. And we can look at that file in text mode just by right mouse clicking on the form area in the form designer and say view as text. And so here's the text representation of the form file. And you can actually edit it in this form, or you can use the object inspector. So far we're getting some of the default created values for setting up a form. It's top left, it's client width and client height, and so on. If we want to go back to the form view, just right mouse click and say view back as form again. Here we've got the structure window. The structure window, when we're in the form designer, will show us the objects or the components that are available that are part of the form. The object inspector, we can set different properties. For example, the form caption. So this is my first app. Okay. We can set the client height and width, or we can grab this little corner and notice as we change it, the client width and height changes as well. So if we want the client width to be 800 then, and maybe 600 for the height, then we can change these properties inside of the object inspector. There's two tabs in the object inspector. One is the properties tab. The properties tab has all those different entries. There's a little search box here, so if you wanted to find anything that has LE in it, you can start typing LE, and maybe you wanted to change the border style from a sizable style to a tool window, and maybe a single or no border style, for example. Maybe if you want to use a form as a dialog box or some little pop-up message window. In form style, you can say, well, it's a pop-up form. Maybe you're using a form and each application can have multiple forms. Or you want a form that always comes to the top rather than being hidden or underneath the covers. You can say it's a stay on top form. We're just going to start with a normal form again here, and more about FireMonkey development on day 3 of the boot camp as well. All right. The second tab over here are events that might be associated with each of the objects that are selected, in my case, the form. So, for example, if we want to do something on the onCreate of a form and the onDestroy of a form, maybe onCreate to hook up some global variables or do some initialization before your application starts for the user, and on the form destroy, do something to clean up after the fact, maybe allocate some memory, connect to a resource of some kind. On mouse move, mouse down, mouse up, all of these different events on resize of the form, you can hook these different events. And the way that you use the object inspector is you just double click, or if there's already event handlers available, you can use the pull down to connect to one of those event handlers that follows the same pattern of parameters. If not, double click. And in the code editor, it will create the form create event handler as a procedure, and we can go in here and do some code of some kind. Now, while we're in the code editor, we'll see certain things show up in the tool palette, in the project group, in the structure window, and again in the object inspector. So, for example, we could create other files, a text file at this point, add projects to our project manager. We can right mouse click and add another file, add a new add a second form, add another unit, a source code file, add an existing file. We can do a clean, a build, a run without debugging, and so on. Add the source file to version control and the project. So all of these options, if you're not sure about something, just right mouse click on it and it will give you choices. Under build configurations in the project manager, we've got a debug build and a release build. We want to do our debug builds to start. Keeps all the debug information so you can step through code and do things. And then before you deploy, you'll probably want to do a release build to deploy your executable. It won't have all that debug information and such of it inside of it. It'll be a smaller application. Right now we're in the starter edition, so our target platform is only going to be 32-bit Windows. As you move up into Pro Edition, Enterprise Edition, and such, or add the mobile add-on pack, you'll see more platforms being chosen. The starter edition starts with just 32-bit Windows as a starting point, but you can do all your development to get ready for moving into a multi-device or multi-platform world if you use the FireMonkey framework. VCL is again Windows only, Windows 32 and Windows 64. 64-bit Windows, if you need that, then you upgrade to the Pro Edition. Okay, that was just quick kind of orienting to the environment of the editor. If you want to go back to the designer, just go back and click the Design tab down here at the bottom. There's the Code tab and there's the History. The History list will show you anything that's changed since the last time that you saved your project. Right now, everything is in memory. So why don't we go and save the project out somewhere? Let's just go and the install creates a directory in your documents called Embarcadero Studio Projects. So I'll just create a folder called First App. And we'll save our project, and let's give it a name here, My First App. And the history now says, okay, out on the file, which is my local file versus what's in the buffer. So let's go back to code, and let's go and put some code of some kind. Let's just add another full-line comment. And again, it will show us the difference between what's out in the file and what is inside of the current file that we're working with. And you can see the differences if you want as well. So if you want to compare the difference between what was saved currently and what's in your memory buffer, you'll see that I added this single line comment, the // so you can take a look at the differences between the work that you're doing by clicking on the Differences tab. And again, see the contents of each that are there. And it keeps these history differences in a subdirectory called History. So it saves the different files as you're doing your work along the way of doing development with the History tab. Okay. Let's go back to the Form Designer and go over here to the tool palette. Now that we have a FireMonkey project, we've got access to a whole bunch of different pre-built components, hundreds of pre-built components that are part of the Starter Edition. So we've got buttons and panels and labels and memos, and we've got system timers and access to Notification Center if you're on Windows 10. We've got some standard dialogues for opening a file, saving a file, print dialog, XML transform, doing some work with the internet. So all these different things, grids and so on, are all available for you. If you want to search and find out what kind of buttons there are, you can just start typing here, and the tool palette will show up what buttons are available. So a regular button, a speed button, a colored button, a radio button, and so on. Let's just add a button to our application, and we'll move it somewhere to the top here. Let's put a toolbar. And on Windows, the default of the toolbar is going to be at the top. We can also set its type and its position. So if we want it to be aligned somewhere else, we'll just say align it to the bottom, for example, and have a toolbar to the bottom. You'll see that in most iOS applications. But on Windows, buttons or toolbars are usually at the top. Now, structure windows, a couple things that are cool you can do is if you've already got a component and you wanted it to be parented or part of another component, and in FireMonkey, components can be parented to another component. Even forms can be parented into a panel or a toolbar, or even a form could be parented into a button, although I haven't thought of a use case where that might make sense to start. What I want is this button to be inside of the toolbar, so I just drag it as part of the toolbar. And now notice in the structure window, it's nested underneath the toolbar. And I want to align this button to the left in the toolbar. So now it fits to the size of the toolbar, and that button is sitting out there. One of the options, or one of the properties in the button here is the text property. So I'll put here click me as the caption or the text. In VCL, buttons have a caption property. In FireMonkey, they have a text property. So if you already have Delphi and know VCL, and you're starting to think about FireMonkey, there's a few differences in some of the properties. For example, the position of the component in X and Y has top left and still client height and width, but you won't see a few other properties in that respect. It still has the tag property and such. I think the biggest thing on a button change is going to be that it's the text property instead of the caption property. Form on Windows and on Mac OS still has a caption. On iOS and Android, there's no notion of a caption of a frame of a window. You just have the screen. And you can use toolbars and panels if you want to have the equivalent of a caption-looking part of an application. So this, we haven't done anything yet. So let's add an event handler to this button. Two ways again. There's an on-click event, on double-click, on key down, other kinds of event handlers. On-click makes sense. There's two ways again. You can double-click inside of the event tab event handler. If you already have some other event that matches its interface, you can choose that one. You can share event handlers that way between different buttons, for example, and then write some code that does something special. The other way is to just double-click on a component, and that brings up whatever its default event handler is. Every component can define a default event handler. In the case of a button, it's going to be the on-click event handler is the default handler. So here I'm just going to say button 1, and we'll set its text property. And notice the completion is going on, code completion. So as we type, if we just hit the dot, we'll see all of the different choices that are available for a button associated with its public and published and private methods. And so here we want to set and properties. So we just want to set the text, and we'll set that equal to 42, right? Because that's the answer to everything in the universe, at least according to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So 42, and then we can save this off. And again, looking at our history, and now we look at what's different between what's in the buffer and the code. Since I did a save, they're exactly the same, right? Okay. And then let's go back to the code, and everything is good there. Let's just hit run without debugging. That's also Shift Control F9. There's shortcuts for all of those. Let's just get our first application working. And there I click on the button, and it executes the event handler for the button click and changes the text property of the button. All right. Okay. So let's go back to the form designer. There are many different views available inside of the IDE, and you can pull down the view menu, and you can, for example, bring up debug windows and so on, file browser, help insight. You can bring up additional edit windows. You can put edit windows different places and move parts of the IDE. All of these can be pinned and unpinned. All of these different windows, you can drag them off somewhere if you want to as well. All of that is available to you. You can unpin them so that they disappear, for example, and then you can bring them back and dock them back wherever you want. All right, so it's all customizable how you want to set up your environment. There's a default layout, a classic undocked layout, and a debug-based layout, but you can create your own layouts as well. So one of the layouts that I like to do, for example, is when I'm editing, I like to unpin all of these things that these other windows that I'm not necessarily focused on, so that I can look at and modify my code. So let's go back in here and change my display to be, I guess what I like, see the console, again, 14. All right, and now we've got bigger code. And what I'm going to do is create a new desktop. Right, and so I'll call this one my max code desktop. All right, so whenever I want to look at the default layout with all the different windows, I'm there. And if I want to look at max code, I look at it this way. So I have a full screen of code available for me to do things with, right? So if I'm in design mode, for example, then I want to look at it this way. If I want max code with just the designer and or editor, then maybe max code is not the best name for it if I'm in the design view. There's a few other things to look at here. When you're in the designer, we've got our style that we're using, and we're using the Windows style because Win32 is in the starter edition. And we have two different types of available views. You can set up different views associated with each target platform style. Maybe you're working on a tablet of some kind of Windows-based tablet, and you have a different form factor, and you want to have that view. You can create additional styles and put them in whatever mode, either landscape or portrait mode you might want to have. And there's documentation on the Doc Wiki about how to create custom styles as well. Again, because we're in Starter Edition, we have one style, it's Windows, and one standard view for desktop, and there's that Surface Pro tablet style. If we want to take a look at that one, then it's got a little bit different layout, right? But let's stay with the default again to get started here, and you'll see more on day 5 about working with things. On the FireMonkey day, there's also style files where you can style the look and feel of your application. Instead of it being the standard Windows default, you can set up a style for, if you like a dark style or for your application look, or you want it to have a blue style or some other kind of style. And we give you standard styles that are available as part of the install. And then there's premium styles that you can download as well if you want some transparent look and feel. Again, you'll see more of that on day 3 with FireMonkey and on day 5 for mobile development. All right, so one of the things I want to do here is I'm going to use this little gutter, and these little blue dots say that on those lines of code, we can set breakpoints. We can do things. So I'm going to set a breakpoint there, and we can right mouse click and bring up the breakpoint properties dialog for that breakpoint. So for example, this just says break. Maybe we want to only break on a pass count on the after 2 times through that breakpoint. So if we click on that button handler a few times, maybe we want to do something with it. So for example, if we go here, I set it to 2, so it doesn't break the first. Oh, wait, sorry. If I say run with debugging, and I click on it, and then when it hits the second time through the pass count 2, then it stops at the breakpoint. And what we see is we see the call stack of how we got to that breakpoint. So it started here with some runtime initialization. There's the app started, the application ran, some other parts of starting up FireMonkey run. And then eventually at the top, we see that we hit the button click, and that's where we're currently executing. We don't have any watch variables right now. For example, we could select this part of the text and say under debug, add watch at cursor. So it's telling us, okay, button text currently has a value of 42. We could actually go in here and change the watch in some way so that the watch only gets updated, for example, as we come through multiple times. We can name them. We can look at their type. So, for example, if we want to see them as hexadecimal, then we'll see that ultimately along the way. And then if you want to step into, trace into, or step over, then we'll come back out and it says, okay, button text is not available. We go back to our application and then wait for it to hit the breakpoint again, right? Okay. So The other thing you could do is, for example, go in and bring up the debug window and evaluate and look at button text, and you could change the value as well. You could go in here and say, well, I don't like 42, I like 43, right? And then now the value of in the watch list is it's got a value of 43. If we continue running, then it does the right thing. It assigns the value that button text is and brings it up on the display, right? So we'll hit the breakpoint again. We can go in here in our breakpoint viewer. We can also set a condition. We could say, for example, when some value of some variable has a certain value or is greater than a certain value. There's also advanced debug and breakpoint capabilities where you can, for example, say to ignore any exceptions or handle any exceptions that might take place. You can log a message, so we could put in here in the event log, we could output the value of a variable. We could log the call stack in the event window. We can say, evaluate an expression, including with side effects. You could call a method with some parameters, for example, in this expression, as long as the expression is known in the runtime type information, the variable information space. We could evaluate an expression, A plus B, for example, and output that value into the event log. So there's lots you can do with breakpoints. Including only hit them at a certain time. So let's go and modify this application. Let's go and run it and come back. Now it's back to 42 again. Let's go back to the design view. And what I'm going to do here is put an edit box. So we'll go and say, let's find an edit box. We've got several different edits, time edit, date edit. We'll just put an edit box down here. And what I'm going to do is put a value, some kind of value in that edit box, and then set the caption equal to that contents of that edit box. All right. So here, instead of 42, I'm going to say button1.text is going to get edit1.text. So whatever I put inside of that edit box is going to be put into the text of the button. All right. And let's just validate that it works. Go in here and say, we could do it 42, and we could say hello or hello, right? And so it's working there just fine. And then I want to go into my breakpoint and say here when edit1.text is equal to 42, if I can type correctly, with an exclamation point. All right. All right. So let's go and run this with debugging. So if we put in hello, it's all good. If I put 42, it's still okay. If I put 42 and an exclamation point, now it hits that breakpoint. So we can set these conditional breakpoints to break on some condition. We can even put a pass count through it as well if we wanted to, or you can delete those. And again, go in and do things like let's log edit one, so we can keep track of what's available. Oh, pass count. Okay. All right, and let's go and run again. Go back to our application, and let's put hello. And let's put 42 exclamation point. So we're at the breakpoint here again because of the value being 42 exclamation point. And I wanted to show you other things that you can look at. For example, we could look at the CPU window, and it'll show us the line of code where we're at, and we can look at the registers. So you've got low-level support. Here's the stack. Here's the memory that's available to us. Here's the flags that are available. We can go and toggle breakpoints, set a breakpoint down here at the CPU level. We can go back to the source code, and it takes us back to where we were, and we can go back to the CPU window as well. Just wanted to show you a little about what you can do inside the debugger in your applications here in the IDE. Now, while we've been doing work on this first app Under the covers, there's some files that are being created as by the IDE in the toolchain. Let's just take a look at that subfolder real quick. Here I am in my first app subfolder. I've got the resource file that will hold things like the application icon, any images or icons and other things that might be part of a Windows application. Here's your project file. That's a MS Build compatible XML file, which has the different project options and toolchain options for building your project. It's got your DPR file. This is your main program file. We could open that, for example, with an editor like Notepad, for example, and so mostly what's in a main program is the program statement. The uses clause is using the FMX forms, so it's a FireMonkey application. And in the main part of your application program, there's an initialize method, creating a form. You can create multiple forms as part of your application, or you can create a form on the fly, and then starting the application running. So application.run. That just runs the main application thread and the main event handler loop inside of that, waiting for clicks, mouse downs, whatever event handlers you might create. Here's our FMX file. Here's our source file for the code that we write behind event handlers and methods and other things. So that's what's there inside of Win32. I've been doing a debug configuration build. So we have a debug folder. If I do a release build, then I'll get that release folder as well. And in here is an executable. We can just run that executable, and there it is. And there's 42. Right. And then also there's a recovery file, which is the most recent save that you've done. In case for something happens to your hardware, Windows crashes, you don't have a battery backup, and your power goes down. When you come back up and you start the IDE, it'll see that there's a recovery file available, and it'll ask if you want to try to recover that project from the last time you did a recovery. You can set a timer option in the IDE to save recovery files periodically, and it'll save whatever project or projects you're working on at the current time. So that's in this under our recovery folder. And in the history folder, for any changes that we make and saves that we do, you'll see multiple levels of change files with these ~1, ~2, ~3, and so on, which gives you different history or version releases. So that's what's happening under the cover, is just part of the tool chain in the IDE, wherever your project folder might be. Inside of environment options, here's your auto save option. You can have it automatically save whenever you exit the IDE or run. You can set auto save there if you want to. Here's this auto recovery setting. Right now, the default is save interval 10 minutes, but you can change that and save more often if you live in an environment where bad things might happen. You might want to set that faster. And there are many other options, again, to explore in the IDE. Okay, there are many samples that come with Starter Edition, with Pro, with Enterprise and Architect, both for Delphi and C++. Those sample files are available both installed if you choose to install them from the feature-based installer. You saw I clicked, I want samples and help. So if you want to find the samples, there's a few ways to do that. One is you can go out to SourceForge, or you can go to the doc wiki. This is the docwiki.embarcadero.com for Berlin. You'll have all your information here about doing Windows development with VCL, or doing multi-device development with FireMonkey, mobile development. Come to day 5, you'll hear more about that. Target platforms and frameworks, programming language help, the IDE reference. There's a whole tour of the IDE you can choose. There's lots of tutorials. And one of the things is the code sample. Let's go and look for code samples. There's a code samples documentation page. We can open that up inside of the doc wiki, where it's got sample applications, and you can browse for information in the help file about the samples that are available. So, for example, code samples and sample applications by functionality. So indexed here by the by FireDAC, again by FMX. If you want to see how to do a sample with the number box, click on the number box and there's an FMX controls sample. So all the samples are documented in the doc wiki. It talks about the implementation, what they use, and other information that you can get to as well. Out on SourceForge, there's the Rad Studio demo code. Go to the branches, and we have in the branches going back to XZ version, but now the Berlin version, so we can click on the Berlin version. And here we keep updated the samples, Object Pascal, data-based examples, and C++ examples. Object Pascal is broken up into mobile snippets, multi-device. Look for FireMonkey there, and in mobile snippets, RTL and VCL. Again, these are samples for all the editions, not just the starter edition. So you'll have to be aware of what features are available in the starter edition, which is FireMonkey and desktop development, not multi-tier, not database, not mobile, unless you want to upgrade. And again, come on day 5 and you'll see more about where you can go from there. You can also go over and say File, Open Project. I've created a favorites, my sample it's in. You'll find it installed in Users, Public Documents, Embarcadero Studio 18.0 and Samples. We go into Object Pascal and we can go into, for example, multi-device samples, maybe some multimedia, streaming media, music player, and so on. These are all FireMonkey applications that run on Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. If you have Google Glass, there's a sample for that. When you go to the Enterprise Edition, cloud-based development with REST, some user interface examples. So, for example, we can go in and say, let's just look at a list view example, maybe a simple list view, and open up that project. And so we've got a little simple list view here with Win32. Just run that example, and it shows us a list view where we can go and select items. We can add an item, delete, edit, and so on. So all those things are available as samples for you to explore as part of your application. You can also say open from version control, and you can choose the version control system that you want. You can go and set the URL, which could be back here in this repository. If you're in the Windows Explorer, notice that these are all under version control. There's your .svn. So we can go out here and we can say, for example, let's update. And I've got Tortoise SVN installed. I can do an SVN update from SourceForge. That information is stored with the SVN information. So if you want to make sure you have the latest samples, the red green check says I do, you can always right mouse click and say do an update and pull from the SourceForge repository into your samples folder, again in User, Public Documents, Embarcadero Studio 18 samples. All right. So I have a couple examples I'd like to show here while we still have a little bit of time that I have grabbed from my from the samples folder and in one case and modified a little bit. So let's go under our projects. I've got this video playback example. And this video playback example has a timer to keep track of the progress of the video. It's got the media player component. The media player component will let us play audio files and video files for different platforms. And then we've got a media player control. This is a space where we can display a playing video and see it on the screen. And it's got a file list here, which just is a list box. And so we can go out and find videos that are on our hard drive. And then we can play and stop them and move to the start, move to the end, go back 10 seconds, forward 10 seconds, and then move a video around in the list and so on. So how this list of files gets populated, let's go down to the form. Oh, and then there's a track bar here that'll move along as the video moves along. So we can also grab the track bar and move in jump around in different parts of our application as well. So let's go and look at the form. There's a form create, and the form create says, let's call a method called getPathWithVideo, which is a method that is associated with the form. We can go and look at it up here. So getPathWithVideo is a private method that is going to return a string of the path to all our videos. And let's go back down to the form create. The form create says, okay, let's call getPathWithVideo, and let's set fLibraryPath, which is a variable inside of our form class. And then we'll call this method called fillFilesList. So we can right mouse click in the editor and say, find the declaration, for example, and then we can go and find all the places where that method is called. And then there's this fillFilesList as well. So let's go down fillFilesList. What fillFilesList is going to do is it's going to populate that list box by adding items to it. Form create then will set the media player volume to some starting volume. So just what is the media player volume currently on your system? And then for inside of getPathWithVideo, there's a case statement. It's using part of what is defined in the IOUtils unit. There's an IOUtils unit which lets you use different methods, use the same methods to get the paths on different platforms. So it's a great unit for moving through files and directories, getting the paths to files, and so on. So check out IOUtils. It's implemented on each of the platforms in a multi-device environment. This tpath type has some methods for doing things like getting a documents path, getting the full path, and so on. TOS version is defined in the unit sysutils. TOS version gives us information about the platform and the version number, so we can write code if we need to associated with each of the different platforms. You may have to do some conditional compilation. You come to Marco Cantu's language tutorial on day 2, as well as doing some runtime inspection of what application your platform you're running on, what version of Windows, for example, what version of Mac OS, what version of iOS, and so on. If you have some need in your logic to deal with different platform specific operations, then you can get the platform variable types. So far we have platform Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, WinRT, and Linux are for the future. So if those happen, we're going to create an exception saying, hey, we don't know anything about this platform currently. So this sample doesn't know what to do with it. It puts out a method. It raises an exception, which will display a string called unexpected platform. I wanted to show using AVI files on Windows, because you may have a Windows platform that doesn't have a codec for MP4 files. The original code said if sample provides MP4 files, so I've created AVI equivalents because the system I'm running on right now does not support MP4, doesn't have an MP4 codec. So I wanted to give you AVI files, and those are supported in Windows. So I commented out the first line of code and then say I'm setting based on what the platform is. If it's Windows, I'm going to set the result of getPathWithWindows to be the path to the AVI files I have, which is 2 subdirectories underneath my executable. You could set up whatever path. Otherwise, if I'm on Mac OS or iOS and Android, there's a tpath method called getFullPath, which will get the full path of where it is for Mac OS in our application bundle, and on iOS and Android, wherever we define in our project deployment. More about that on Friday on day 5 to get the path where the documents are, which is where you would put MP4 files, data files, INI files, and so on, is part of your application bundle on those platforms. But I just say get path with video. Now, files list. So get files, the fill files list method right up here is going to say if I'm on the Windows platform, then I'm going to use the tpath combine method, taking that library path, which was found in the form create, and adding star.avi. So that'll get me the path string to all of my AVI files. Here's that wildcard. And then I'll do find first. And after I call find first, which is a sysutils, then I'll just add to the list box the name of files that are found, find next until I run out of files, and then I'll close the find and be done with this adding to my list box the files. If I'm on a platform other than Windows, those other platforms, Mac OS, iOS, and Android, support MP4 files, so we'll tell it to do form files. Now, you can go back in, and if you have a codec installed on Windows that supports MP4, then FireMonkey will find it, and you can play MP4 files as well. WMV files and AVI files are native and found on most Windows installation, like this machine that I'm using here has just the standard codecs that are available on Windows 7. So AVI and WMV are sort of the standard ones there in MP4. And then for audio, MP3, and then there's different extensions for audio files for doing media player of audio files on different platforms. And those are all documented in the DocWiki as well. All right, so that's the on-form create, which is going to populate this list. And then we have this play button. And the play button, when we click on it, is just going to say, for whatever file is selected, let's play it. All right. Let's go back to the list box. And it's got an on-item click event handler. And on-item click is going to say, well, first let's stop the media player if it's playing. Or even if it's not, then it won't do anything with the stop method. And then we're going to use the IOUtils tpath method to, again, combine the library path with the string, which is the item text. So this combine is very nice. It takes the path and it puts the, let's see, on Windows, the backward slash versus on Mac and iOS and Android, the forward slash. It puts that in there and then appends the name of the file .avi.mp4.mp3, whatever, on the end. So you don't have to worry about does my path already have the backslash or forward slash? The combine method will put the slash if it's needed, and if it's not needed, the right format of the slash. And if there isn't one at the end, it'll put one in there for you. So you don't have to write a bunch of code to see, is there a slash on the end before I append the file name and extension on the end of it. The combine method does all that under the covers. And again, tpath is a great IOUtils type that's available for you, and it's got some great methods. So we'll use that again. That way, this code will work on any FireMonkey platform and file system, whether it's Windows, Mac OS, and so on. We don't have to think about that once we've set up the right parameters for combine, the library path, whether it's / my documents, assets, internals, whatever it might be on the different platforms. Again, day 5 for mobile. All right. So with that, we'll compile this on Windows. Let's hit run. And here's our little application. Now notice, since I'm running on Windows, I've got AVI files on my file list. Let's set the first one. It loads it into the media player, which then is connected. And remember, I mentioned the media player is connected to this media player control, which knows how to display media players. And then we'll hit the play. And then we go 10 seconds back and 10 seconds forward and go to the end. And then we're at the end with play. So let's go 10 seconds back, 10 seconds back, 10 seconds forward, 10 seconds back. And we'll stop it again, right? And then here's Ocean. And then go to the end and stop, right? So that's just a example of doing multimedia in a FireMonkey application. Again, it's a FireMonkey form. I should show this. Right mouse click, view a more complex form. So I showed you early on with my first app, there was just the default properties here for caption, client height, and width, and so on. As you start adding more components and changing properties, then under the covers in the FMX file, the IDE with the designer and the object inspector are adding non-default values. So if we change the position of this rectangle, for example, from a default position when it first started up, you'll see those changes. So the stream file, or the FMX file, which is the form design, only keeps changes you've made from the default values or the default property values of any component. So it gets larger over time. And again, it's a stream instance of the form values. Then you'll see more things show up here. If I wanted to change that caption from form to video player, right? And then let's just go back and say view as form. And then if we run the application, notice the caption now has video player. So you can edit the text properties associated with a form. You can also instead choose the form and set the caption to be FMX video player. Right, and if we view form as text, it's got FMX video player down there. And let's go back and view as form and run it again. And now it recompiles and links, and it's FMX video player. Right. If we go and do a release configuration, still again Win32, let's go and just do a build. All right. And I'm not worried about warnings there. That's fine. Then if I go back into my project and video playback under Win32, I've got a release build. And now I've got a small executable. There it is. Doesn't have all that debug information. And if we go to the debug version, there it is. It's larger. We can go and run the video player again. And it finds all the right stuff. And everything's wonderful. There's the video showing up in our little window. All right. And in my history, I've got a couple different choices going on here because I've made two different changes, some from before and then later on. So if I go back into the history view, I can go and do a difference between what's in version 2, for example, and what's in our other versions. So what's in the buffer and so on. So you can do all of that inside of the history view and go and look at information about who's changed what in the different files and different versions along the way. And again, you if you're connected into Git or Subversion or Mercurial, then the history view is not the local history view file. It's going to be the history in your version control system. All right. Now, if we want to add additional files to a project group, we just say add existing project. And let's go back to our projects. Then let's put my first app. And so there now I've got 2 projects. And let's go and add a third one that we're going to look at next in our projects. This is a parallel programming example. Okay. Now we've got 3 projects in a project group. If we save, it's going to ask us to create a project group name. So this will be the David I project group. And then we can close all, which will close everything. Another part that happens is that inside of the IDE, it keeps track of recent projects that you've opened. So if I go and open, for example, this parallel programming example, and then I close it, now I've got those examples. And you can add these to your favorites. The favorites show up down here in the welcome page. All right, so this is our welcome page that says start here. There's my project group, and you can go and edit these and delete them. You can also say file reopen on the file menu, bring up the properties, and you can go down and add or delete projects from your recently opened projects. All right, so if I do that, I don't have any recently opened projects, but I still have my favorite projects. and I can go and delete those right inside of here. We've got our any tutorials. There's the tutorials for setting up your machine, setting up your Mac for iOS and OS 10. You'll hear more about that again on Friday. Here's some sample applications you can get to, and then here's the documentation in the doc wiki. Here's your start here. You can also close this welcome page if you want to and open it up at any time. So let's go back and look at the second runtime library example. Delphi Berlin comes with a parallel programming library that provides you with a parallel for loop, a parallel task system where you can create multiple tasks, and a future variable. So you can have an application that is going to wait for some variable to have a value. And as far as you're concerned, you just declare it as a future. And then when you use that variable in an expression, or you want to get the value of that variable if it doesn't, at that point under the covers, that request for a future variable will wait for a task to complete. And Marco Cantu should be covering more about the language and maybe parallel programming on the language day, which is tomorrow, Tuesday. But I'll give you a little glimpse here inside of this sample. This started as a sample from Danny Wind. Danny Wind is an MVP from the Netherlands. And he wanted to show you an example of how to have a responsive user interface for FireMonkey, so that you can put operations of coding or long-running queries or whatever it might be in separate threads so that your user interface would still be responding. So the way he showed this is he put a scroll bar at the top, and this is just a FireMonkey's T scroll bar, and he's got an animation, a float animation. This float animation is going to use that scroll bar, and it's going to set the start value from 0 to 100, and then it's going to run for a second. So it's going to move in a linear fashion the little thumb here of the scroll bar, move it back and forth, and it's enabled and it's in a loop, so it'll just keep running and running and running. So let's just start the application and see it running itself. So there's that scroll bar running back and forth. All right, because it's got a float animation property, and more about animations on Wednesday when Jim takes you deeper into FireMonkey, right? And animation is in-out, so it's going in and out, and the values from the start value to the end value. All right. Now, I've got Danny's had one button which just created a task and then did something inside of that task, and you could see that the animation, this float animation, runs in the main thread. And so if you do anything in your main application that would block the thread, then you'll notice that it would stop. If you do it as a parallel operation in a separate thread, then the main thread will still be running, which is moving the float animation of the scroll bar. All right, so I've got two buttons here. One is called parallel. Let's take a look at that one first. I've got a little label that's going to get the value of a random number when the parallel task finishes. So here is task is the name of the class. It has a run method. There are lots of different parameters for the run method. If you want to see what they look like, we can just go here, task.run, and hit the parenthesis, and then we can see that it takes, for example, it can take a procedure, it can take an object as a sender and a notify event for that object, and so on. So these parallel tasks and for loop and futures have different options. In this case, and more about this with Marco Cantu tomorrow, it's going to take an anonymous method. It doesn't have a name. It's a procedure. And inside of the body of the run parameters, I'm going to sleep for 3 seconds and then generate a random value and display that random value on that parallel label. And down here on the second button, I just do the same thing in a serial fashion, saying, okay, set the text to 2 dashes, sleep for 3 seconds, generate a random number, and then output the value. So this is going to be a blocking when that sleep operation happens. It's going to block the main thread. In the case of this first button, The separate thread's going to run, and it's going to run and sleep and do things, but that scroll bar, the main thread, is going to continue to run. So we'll see this in action. Right, so if we do the parallel, notice that it's going to sleep for 3 seconds and then generate a random number. And notice that the main thread, which is doing the float animation of the scroll bar, is not affected at all. Right? Okay, and now if I do the serial operation, it does a serial sleep, and it sits there and it stops, right? It stops the main thread because the event handler is part of the main thread. It sleeps for 1, 2, 3 seconds, and then the animation continues. So if you want a responsive user interface, if you've got some other things happening, put those operations in task runs, and you can start at multiple tasks. Won't go through all of it, but you can start multiple tasks. You can wait for any task to complete, or you can wait for all tasks to complete. You can also query the status of each task. Is it running? Is it stopped? And so on. So check out the parallel programming library. Check out Danny Wynn's Code Rage session that he did a couple Code Rages ago. I'll put the links to that in the blog for day one so that you can look at how to do parallel programming with Delphi and the impact of doing things like test runs and so on. So having this responsive user interface to the user, if you're doing some long-running calculation or some long-running query or some other operation, letting the user still get notices of what's going on and being able, if possible, interact with other parts of your application is a great use case for using the parallel programming library. Okay, one last piece I'd like to show you in the IDE, and then we can get to questions, is the Get It Package Manager. And the Get It Package Manager is a mechanism for grabbing additional components that are available out there, open source components, free components from different vendors, open source projects like the Turbo Pack, which is part of the Turbo Power tools that are available for VCL. For example, Async Pro for doing COM or async serial-based communication. There's lots of different components that you can look for. With the Starter Edition, there's an alternative parallel programming library called the OmniThread library that's available. There's some security based applications. There's an object inspector and object set of components called Orpheus. There's a PDF from the Turbo Pack to design PDFs in the IDE. So there's lots of different components that are available for you in the Starter Edition. The ribbon controls, if you want those standard VCL ribbon controls that match MS Office 2007, some other tabs, and so on. So you can go and choose some of these. And the way that Get It works is you just go and grab one of these. Let's go and grab, for example, the, SysTools VCL, for example. We click install, and it goes out. It tells us what the license is. We can agree to it, and then it will download it, and then it will go and compile and build the components and install them in the IDE. So if it says process is done, let's close this. Let's go and say new. I think that was a VCL-based application. So if we go down here to the Object Inspector, now we have the SysTools sets of components. So it looks like network connection. We can drop one of those down and so on, right? Set properties and such. So Get It is a way that we use as part of the feature installer to get updates for common updates that are available, as well as going and getting extended components that are available, some of which are non-visual that will work on FireMonkey or VCL, some that are VCL only, and it usually will tell you what's available, whether it's a VCL only or whether it's a non-visual. In general, non-visual controls, usually, unless they're tied specifically to Windows platform, can be agnostic. They can run on FireMonkey and VCL. Some can work cross-platform. Again, you can look at the documentation for each of these open source projects and the information that's available and Get It to to see what is available and how to use those in your applications. But it's an easy way to install new components and updates into your IDE using the tools feature install get it package manager. Now, if you upgrade, or if you've forgotten to install, for example, one of these language packs or samples or help, you can go back into manage platforms. If you add new keys and you have access to 64-bit or mobile or whatever, then you'd see more choices show up in platforms as well. So all of that is available in the tools manage platform. Get it package managed for getting updates and components that are available, and more show up over time depending on which edition you're also running. Now, I wanted to cover a few things just in advance of the next several days, and then again we'll get to Q&A. Here in developing multi-device applications, here's the different platforms that we currently support for Delphi. Again, Delphi Starter Edition is Win32 only, but to show where you can go when you upgrade to Pro, Enterprise, and above, or do the mobile add-on pack or the client-server add-on pack for your starter, getting to Pro and beyond. You can see Win64, Mac OS, iOS, and Android available as well, and the types of applications. There's a whole set of information about FireMonkey, and again, that's on day 3, going deep dive into FireMonkey. Notice that VCL and FireMonkey are not compatible. You could put a FireMonkey form or a VCL form in a DLL and then use it in one or the other. We've got information about those things. The RTL is the same under the covers for the standard RTL. Anything that's in the system unit will work on VCL or FireMonkey and work across platform, unless it's a Windows-specific API, for example. Here's a page, commonly encountered differences between VCL and FireMonkey. So there's an action manager for FireMonkey. There's also an action manager if you use actions for VCL. Checkboxes. Checkboxes should use on-change invent instead of on-click in FireMonkey, so use on-change. The property of flexes state is checked, not checked. So in VCL, for checkboxes, we test, is it checked or not? It's a Boolean. For FireMonkey, is checked. Again, in VCL, only forms, frames, panels, and data modules can contain other components. In FireMonkey, any component can be parented to any other component, both at design time and using code. So again, I've done examples where I've put a FireMonkey form inside of a panel or inside of a button by setting the form.parent for my created form at runtime equal to the button or the panel or whatever. Colors. FireMonkey has an opacity part in addition to RGB, so it uses types T alpha color. And FireMonkey can use the color constants in UI constant. They've got CLA. So there's lots of things here. Font size. VCL fonts are expressed in points. In FireMonkey, they're expressed in dips, 96 per logical inch versus 72 per logical inch. So there's a few things. Rad buttons and groups. Again, a few things that are different. If you want to migrate and you've got some VCL code and forms in Delphi, there is a third-party tool called Media Converter, which is an IDE extension that lets you convert your VCL forms to FireMonkey forms and some of the Delphi code associated with it as well. So you just create a new FireMonkey application and you can decide to cut and paste most of your code and parts of the components in, but the Media Converter will do it all automatically, and it'll give you a full report, and it does a great job when you've got standard VCL components. It has support for some third-party components, but check out Media Converter. He's got some demos and also tells you what third-party components that he's supporting that you might use in your VCL app. So it's a way to get there. And then in the IO utils, unit system.io utils, there's a great page. I'll put these links in the blog for day one for all the methods associated with tpath. So get home path, get temp path, get library path, get the documents path, shared documents, and so on. So there's lots of methods here for getting the information you need on each platform. Most of the standard defaults on Windows is going to be in your window, your My Documents, unless you have, or your public documents, for example. On Mac OS, iOS, and Android, it's going to be different. And so this page is a great page that tells you if you call this method, then this is what it's going to give you, right? It's going to give you documents and setting, username, application data for the home path versus private var, mobile applications, whatever that underneath the covers application ID might be on the different platforms to hide it from other people. So these methods are great things to use so that you don't have to write a lot of platform-specific code. You can use the IOUtils unit across the different platforms and just get used to starting using it right away if you haven't been using it in the past. IOUtils will save you lots of time. It's great on Windows, number one, and then as you start moving onto different platforms, it will help you even more when you want to start taking those same projects over to different platforms. Again, people always ask people's always ask me, well, what should I use if I'm starting a project? Should I use VCL or should I use FireMonkey? And the best advice to give is if you're starting a new project and you believe you want to take that project to other platforms in the future, start with FireMonkey right away. So again, there's the short URL for my day one bootcamp, and I'll add the links of the things that I was talking about during this presentation. We'll get those up as soon as possible, and then we'll have the replays up on a playlist for the bootcamp as well throughout the week. So check back to the blog posts and the landing page for the whole bootcamp for links to the YouTube channel. It's Embarcadero TechNet. You can go and see there and look down the playlist, and you'll see a 2016 bootcamp. Delphi Bootcamp list going on. We did a C++ Bootcamp a few weeks ago. Those replays are up as well. We're following a similar agenda. So with that, I will turn it over to your questions. Again, there's my email address, david.intersimony@embarcadero.com or davidi@embarcadero.com. There's my Twitter handle @davidi99. So thank you for joining us on this first day of the Delphi Bootcamp. Tomorrow, Marco will cover the Object Pascal language in depth. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. Otherwise, now it's time to handle your questions.
David I here. Jim, I think you're there, and others are on as well.
This is Jim McKeith. Yes. Thank you for that great session, David I.
I think some of the common questions are, will the replay for each day's session be available? And the answer is yes. We wait until after we get the Q&A from both 6 a.m. and 11 a.m. And then I put that all together to a replay. It gets on YouTube. The blog post that I have will include that link once it's available, or you can go to the Embarcadero YouTube channel. It's Embarcadero TechNet, TECHNET, on YouTube. You can search for it. We'll have a playlist for the Delphi Bootcamp, just as we have a playlist for the C++ Bootcamp we did a few weeks ago. So, and each blog post day will also include additional links to any source code, other sources of information that might be available. I've already updated day one's blog post with a bunch of information links, and I'll keep adding to that as I go through the question logs here throughout the day today. So use that day one blog post that is on the Embarcadero Developer Network blog, or go to David I's blog, Sip from the Firehose, and you'll see all of that, all those information links for you. I'll put the sample code. I need to zip that up and upload it to Code Central, and I'll put that link in the blog post as well. The replays will have the Q&A at the end, and in the YouTube post that I put up, I'll tell you when the Q&A starts. So if you want to stop when you get to the Q&A point of the replay, or if you want to switch right to the Q&A, you can do all that. There were some multiple questions about, will this starter edition run on 64-bit Windows? And the answer is the IDE while it is a 32-bit Windows-based IDE, it uses large memory model on Win64, so you can install the Starter Edition, the Pro Edition, Enterprise Edition, Architect Edition. You can install those on Win32 and or Win64. On Win64, Starter Edition still will only create Win32-based executables. That's its limitation. But if you upgrade to Pro, Enterprise, and above, you can create Windows 64-bit. If you had mobile add-on pack, or if you have Enterprise and above, you can do multi-device. You'll see more about that on day 5. FireMonkey is included, and VCL. Someone asked, is VCL going away? And the answer is no, VCL is not going away, at least as long as Microsoft has a Windows SDK and a Windows API for doing user interface development. Then the visual part of VCL will be around. Anything that's in the system namespace, more about namespaces and unit scope tomorrow with Marco Cantu. In the system space, that's the runtime library, and that's available on all the different platforms. FireMonkey is available on all the different platforms. You'll see more about that again on day 5. The parallel programming library that I showed, just the task run interface. I didn't show parallel 4 or future values, but I have a link on my blog post to Danny Wynn's Code Rage 9 session, where he's got his replay from Code Rage 9, and he's got links to the source code for his examples for using parallel programming library. The parallel programming library works on Win32, Win64, Mac OS, iOS, and Android, and will work ultimately when the Linux platform is supported as well. Same source code, just recompile that part of the parallel programming library in your code. Marco Cantu has talked about the future directions in the roadmap that was updated on August 2016. So go to Marco Cantu's blog, where he does a roadmap update that looks out into the future for RAD Studio, which includes Delphi. And Marco also recently did a blog post on a sneak peek of the Linux platform support. He creates a console application in the IDE and targets Linux and then runs it. I think he was running it on Ubuntu, but I'll leave it to Marco to chime in. I put that link in the Q&A log to Marco's blog post. So the work is continuing on the platform support for Linux server and Linux console apps. We're not currently planning to bring over GUI or FireMonkey to Linux. It's really targeted on Linux server, building web servers, REST servers, server-side applications that you can connect with different mechanisms, app tethering and so on, maybe doing Linux and talking to Bluetooth and so on your Linux server machines. For doing, again, the IDE work, we're using Win32 and Win64. On Windows, Starter Edition is Win32 targeting only, as you saw. We support other chips in the Pro and Enterprise editions on each of the platforms. So on Windows, it's Intel processors. On Mac OS, it's Intel processor. On iOS, it's ARM processor. On Android, it's ARM processor. We don't do Intel on Android, but recent versions of Android include Intel's Houdini technology, which under the covers converts ARM instructions into Intel instructions. So if you want to take an Android ARM application built with Delphi and run it on an Android Intel tablet, for example, that all happens under the covers as long as you have the latest Houdini. More about that on Friday again for multi-platform development. Today was about Win32, what you get in using FireMonkey and the IDE using the Starter Edition. There were questions about database access, and database access is available locally, meaning using local host IP addressing in the professional editions. And then if you want to upgrade to the Enterprise Edition, or if you want to add the FireDAC client server pack, you can then talk to remote databases. So local meaning if you've got SQLite or Interbase Lite or Interbase running locally or MySQL running locally or Oracle XE running locally or Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres, and so on. As long as they're local, you can use the Pro Edition to talk to those SQL databases. If you want them to be remote, then meaning on a different IP address from the running application, then you need the Enterprise or the FireDAC client server add-on, and that's how you would get to database. FireMonkey supports binding to data. There's a bindings property for edit boxes, you know, and all the other user interface elements, memos, and so on. So you can bind data in code. And that's the architecture for FireMonkey. For those that know the VCL, there were two sets of components: the regular UI components like edit box and list box and so on, and then there were database equivalents, DB list box, DB edit, and such. But when we added the binding mechanism for FireMonkey back in, what was it, XE2, XE3, we also added the binding mechanisms for VCL as well. Again, more about all of that on Friday with the mobile development that goes on.
One comment, a few people on YouTube have commented that the video quality is not very good. If you click the gear in the lower right-hand corner, you can change the quality all the way up to 1080p and it'll look great then. So if you're on YouTube and not seeing good quality, check that out.
Yeah, the replay is 1080. GoToWebinar does some screwy stuff with screen grabbing when it's live streaming, but again, once the replay is on YouTube, it'll be full 1080 resolution, so it'll look great. Go ahead, Jim.
There's a special offer going on right now. So we had the Starter Edition available for free for everybody, so if you're on this, you can grab the Starter Edition for free. But it turns out there's also a special offer where if you buy the Pro version, you get the mobile add-on pack for free. And we have discount upgrade pricing from Starter to Pro. And so even though you got Starter for free, you can use that free Starter to get a discount on upgrading to Pro and get the mobile add-on pack for free. So I realize a lot of you just got Starter Edition, but if you take advantage of that super great opportunity right now to upgrade to Pro with the mobile add-on pack, it's like the best combination of special offers came together for you because everything lined up right now. So take a look at that. You can find out more about that at embarcadero.com/radoffer.
See, I was trying to think. Somebody was asking about NoSQL support. FireDAC does support MongoDB currently in 10.0 Berlin and 10.0 Seattle and 10.1 Berlin. Jim McKeith did some skill sprints and did Code Rage 10 sessions, a two-part on using MongoDB with FireDAC. So you go to Code Rage X or Code Rage 10 and check out Jim McKeith's two-part session on using Delphi and MongoDB with FireDAC. And the database team is looking at other NoSQL databases to support in the future. Right now it's MongoDB.
If there's a specific NoSQL database you want to see supported, go to quality.embarcadero.com and you can submit a feature request and let them know what database you would like to see supported. And they will include that information in their consideration for future releases. So that's quality.embarcadero.com to put that on there.
Yeah, I've answered a lot of other questions in the Q&A log. So those are some of the common ones. Again, the replay will be available. Source code will be available. The samples are installed if you check the option box in the feature-based installer to install the samples. But you can also go and grab those, as I mentioned, from SourceForge. And I think, Jim, and Marco, I think we're also going to be duplicating, I think, the samples on GitHub somewhere. At least for now, I know it's on SourceForge, right?
Correct. Yes, it'll be on GitHub eventually. I'm not sure if it's going to be with a future release, we'll roll it all out on GitHub, but that is currently the plans. We have our GitHub account set up, just don't have all the samples on it yet.
Yeah, it's more likely that will become available in the next release.
And we'll probably keep it on both for a while. Who knows? But they will ship with the product.
And again, I'll upload my samples to Code Central and put a link in the blog for day one. So someone was asking about the parallel serial task project that I showed, and just bookmark my blog post for day one, and I'll add that link sometime probably between this morning session and the 11 a.m. session. I just need to zip them up and upload them. So we'll put that, and again, the Q&A will be available with the replay.
And actually, speaking of replay, because we're streaming this live on Facebook and YouTube, they're automatically recording that, and so there will be a recording of the first session available immediately, and it's already embedded on the blog post for day one. So if you go to that 2016 Delphi Camp 1 link down at the bottom of the page, you can find a replay of this session live right now as we're doing this. So if you want to jump back 5 seconds and hear me say that again, you can totally do that right now on that page. So we will have a updated final official replay probably later that combines the Q&A from both sessions together and maybe fixes that dialogue that popped up saying go to webinar was full or something like that. Will be available later. But for right now, you can grab that replay immediately. There are a lot of questions here, and we're trying to get as many of them answered as we can. But if you do have a question that you didn't get answered, you can go to community.embarcadero.com, and we have a questions area that you can post questions in. You can also post your questions on Stack Overflow, and there's a great community on there. And then there's also a community on Google Plus. That if you go to the Delphi developer community on there, there's lots of people answering questions. Although, to be honest, there's a community on LinkedIn, a community on Facebook, a community pretty much everywhere that will help answer your questions. So it's just a matter of finding the community that works best for you, that where you're at, and you can get lots of help. There's a huge community out there helping answer questions.
Yeah, there's several additional FireMonkey questions that come to day 3. Jim's going to be covering, I think Jim and maybe Daniele's going to join you. I'm not sure, but it's going to be a whole big session on Wednesday, day 3 on FireMonkey, including style support and everything.
Yeah, Daniele's going to be on there. He's going to have one of his favorite recipes from his Delphi cookbook, and he'll be on there sharing that with everybody. So come check that out. It's going to be great. I always like when we get to bring somebody on like that, one of our MVPs that's an expert, and in this case he's got his book out, the Delphi Cookbook 2nd edition, and you can learn lots of great information from him. So lots of great Delphi books right now. There's Marco's Object Pascal Handbook, which you got for free. There's the Delphi Cookbook, 1st edition and 2nd edition. 2nd edition's got some newer content, some repeated content from the 1st edition. There's Nick Hodges has Coding in Delphi and More Coding in Delphi. And I know I'm probably totally forgetting a bunch of other really good books that are out there right now, but there are quite a few.
If you go to community.embarcadero.com and you look on the under the resources menu on community.embarcadero.com, the last entry in the resources menu is books, and I try to keep that updated as new books show up for Delphi, C++ Builder, FireMonkey, VCL, and so on. So there's a link up there to information about Daniele TT's, he's got his recipes for doing FireMonkey development. It's called, well, shoot, I should remember it. Delphi Cookbook. It now has a 2nd edition by Daniele TT, so it's a great book. Just go to community.embarcadero.com/resources/books. Here, I'll put that in the chat window for everyone. Send that to everybody. So there's lots of good books for different things related to Delphi. Of course, Marco Cantu's Object Pascal Handbook covers the language. You're going to get, a that tomorrow on day 2. And then there are other books on doing Delphi development, VCL development, FireMonkey development, and so on. So check out the link I put in the chat window that links to books. And if you know of other books, just send me an email, david.intersimony, or shorter form, davidi@embarcadero.com. And I'll add them to the community resource books page, static page. There's a question here about NFC support. We're not doing anything specific with NFC, but you can always call into the mobile APIs for near field communications. I know some of the Samsung devices have NFC support, so you can do
some of our
API call. Yeah, you can do an API call. Again, you can come back on Friday and ask more about mobile development, but you can always call underlying APIs, even for Windows. You can call the Windows API. Each form has a window handle. You can do all sorts of low-level operating system calls for macOS, iOS, Android, Windows. So you're not blocked from doing those kinds of low-level calls. It's all available. And I didn't show everything in IDE. There's refactorings and navigation and all sorts of other things. I put on my blog post for today a link to the doc wiki. There's a tour of the IDE, and it has different documents that describe all the different functionality of the development environment. I could have gone on for a whole day, for example, just on the IDE functionality. So I wanted to hit some of the high points. I think those were most of the common questions, Jim and everyone else. I'm not sure if I missed some of the big ones. Again, people asking about next versions and future versions. Go to the roadmap and take a look at Marco's recent blog post on Linux. If you're interested in see how it works, it uses, again, the same Windows IDE, but then when we ship that product, then you'll get, and you upgrade, then a new target platform will show up called Linux. And I know they're testing and developing against, I think, Ubuntu and Red Hat, a version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So at least a couple of those, but people have other favorite distributions, and if they have the same kernel, should be okay. But I know the team is testing against a couple versions of that. So that's more forward-looking versus a starter edition today. Check out Media Converter again if you've got some existing VCL code that you inherited from someone or that you've developed and you want to get to FireMonkey. It does a great job for Delphi. It not only converts the form and also will connect up live bindings if you've got any database things, but it also will do some updates of Delphi source code along the way, and there's different editions of Media Converter. So you can check that out. And there's been sessions in the past. If you search for Delphi Media Converter, there's replay videos showing how it works in real life.
Doug is asking about creating a single standalone executable with Delphi. And that's actually the default when you create an application with Delphi. If you're not linking in any external DLLs, when you hit compile, it created a single exe, and that single exe is all you need to distribute with your application. If you reference files or reference DLLs or reference some sort of special library, then you might have an exception there, but generally speaking, most of your applications, unless you do something different, it's going to work. Just create a single exe when you build it, and that's all you have to distribute.
Yeah, check out the project menu, the options submenu under project options, and under the compiler and linker sections, and under the application packages section. You can choose different options. Some people want very, very small executables, and then they deploy the runtime packages that they might use as part of their application. So you could build, very little executables, but then carry around some BPLs. BPLs are the package libraries that are actually DLLs under the covers. But you can say, let's not link with runtime packages, not use any runtime packages, and then you get a Windows executable under the covers. And again, I showed you how to create a debug version and a release version under the project manager window, build configuration options. So you've got those settings as well. And you could also create multiple option sets. If you have different options that you want to set for project options, you can create these option set files and have those as part of your build process for different kinds of target executables that you want to build. So it's a very flexible environment. The dproj file is an XML file. It's MS Build compatible. So if you've got some configuration build tools that support MS Build, you can put those into your, you can put those dproj file into those continuous integration systems, and they'll process them just fine. You can also open up the dproj file. It's just an XML file, and you'll see all the different settings and things that happen under the covers in the tool chain. And the DPR file is just the main source file. I showed that, you know, application.run is the biggest thing, but you may very seldom need to put something in the main application to do some special initialization that you can't do, for example, in the onCreate of your main form. And so you can put statements or code in the DPR main program file. Usually it's better to isolate those kinds of initializations into the form files on create and on destroy to do specific point initialization and clean up. But if you need to do something special, you can go and edit the source code file for the main program file as well. Okay, let's see. Yeah, again, I'll put my samples up with a link to on my blog post. So that's where you'll find the samples. I'll try to throw in a parallel 4 sample that I have and that does prime numbers and a simple future variable, but I just wanted to show a sample of one part of the parallel programming library. So, okay, I think, Jim...
There's a few questions about, can you do X with... I was going to say there's a few questions about, like, can I do X with Delphi or whatever. One thing about Delphi is, and this is true across all the platforms. Now, Starter only supports Windows, but with Pro, with the mobile, you can get on iOS, Android, and Mac OS X. But the thing about Delphi is it gives you this nice high productivity layer with the components and stuff like that, like David was showing today. But you can also go down and access all the platform APIs. And so, like earlier, David was talking about NFC. We don't have an NFC component, but you can access the libraries and the APIs on all those platforms and use NFC. We don't have a component, for example, for Firebase, which is an online NoSQL database, essentially. But people have made libraries for that because if it exists, if you can program against it, you can do it with Delphi. There's a third-party library that lets you consume and use the .NET framework. It's called Crosstalk. So if you're like, well, I want to do this, it's in .NET. Okay, well, you can do that with Delphi. Now, just because we don't have a high-level component for it doesn't mean you can't do it. And so really anything, any APIs on any platform we support, you can use those with Delphi. So best case scenario, we have a component, makes it really easy. Maybe someone else has a component, makes it really easy if you install that component. Worst case scenario, you have to write just as much code as you would with C# or Visual C++ or whatever third-party library to do that. But you can do it because Delphi gives you access to those APIs. So if you're wanting to know if we can support something, the answer is yes, if it's on one of those platforms.
Yeah, I always point people to the feature matrix. If you go to the Delphi product page, on the right-hand side, there's a datasheet link. There's a feature matrix link. The feature matrix is a PDF, and it has multiple columns that shows you what features are in the Starter Edition, the Pro Edition, the Enterprise and Above Edition. So that's probably the easiest, simplest way. Grab the PDF and read down to see which edition contains which features. And again,
questions about...
Go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say there's some questions about moving from older versions of Delphi to Delphi Berlin 10.1. Delphi is really, really good at being backwards compatibility, way better than most other development libraries frameworks out there. The one thing that in 2009 we released Unicode support, so we moved strings from being ANSI strings to Unicode strings. If your code uses strings as text, then it's probably fine. If you're putting like binary data into your strings, you might have a little bit of stuff that needs to be changed. We have a webinar coming up that talks about some migration things to deal with, but for the most part it should be able to migrate fairly easily. So Unicode will be the one thing that's complicated or might be complicated for you. We have some tools you can use for that. The other thing that might be complicated is if you were using BDE or for your database access. BDE has been deprecated. It's available as a separate download, but we have utilities that will convert BDE to FireDAC. And I'll tell you what, FireDAC is a phenomenal data access framework. It's got all the cool features of the BDE plus so many more, way lighter weight, way faster. But that's available. FireDAC is a Pro Plus feature, so not in Starter. But anyway, we have a webinar coming up. Check out community.embarcadero.com to find out more about that on migration. I think the webinar is posted on the site. If not, it will be available shortly. So stay tuned for that, and you can join us for that webinar.
And for the parallel programming library, under the covers, it's using the thread APIs of each of the platforms. It's just easier and more expressive to use the parallel for, the parallel task, and the parallel future variable than it would be to have to write all the low-level code yourself to call using just the base T-thread object. It's all built ultimately from the threads on each platform, and it's compatible across all the platforms we support. So speed-wise, it depends on what you're doing inside of your task or your parallel for loop. But as far as overhead, it's just calling the underlying thread APIs on each of the platforms. So there's no real big overhead. It also has tuning. You can use thread pools. You can set those up. Again, you can check out the parallel programming library documentation. Check out Danny Wynn's. I've linked to his replay from Code Rage 9. He really goes through it through parallel programming library in lots of detail with lots of great samples. And he gives you the source code link in his blog post about his Code Rage 9 session as well. So check it out and try it. It's very cool, very expressive.
Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour here. Yeah. There is probably still a few questions here. Do go to community.embarcadero.com or Stack Overflow or wherever, and you can probably either find existing answers to your questions or post your questions and get new answers. So community.embarcadero.com, Stack Overflow, those are my two favorite places to go for questions and answers. Like I said, their Facebook communities and Google Plus communities and such also have lots of great support. Actually, there's a huge community on LinkedIn. I'm not involved in that, but I'm always surprised to see all the conversations going on out there. And I'm sure there's probably some on Tumblr and everywhere else too. But community and Stack Overflow would be my two top recommendations if you have questions that we didn't get answered for you today. And yeah, and then there's lots of videos on YouTube. We have over 1,000 videos on YouTube or 1,500 videos on YouTube. It's crazy how many videos we have on YouTube that you can check out that will cover lots of topics. All the Code Rage replays are available there. And,
including all those short how-to videos. If you go to the how-to playlist, there's little 5-minute, 6-minute, 2-minute, 3-minute videos on how to do very specific things. And then a little bit longer things. 100 or more of those. Yeah. And then a little bit longer would be the skill sprints series that we did, where there's another 100 or so. And then Code Rage's, yeah. So check out everything. Just go to youtube.com/Embarcadero TechNet, TechNet. Go scan through the playlists names and then choose playlists that are in the areas you're interested in, and then look at the videos that, or you can search for specific topics as well and get to those videos.
Let's see. A couple of people have mentioned that they had C++ starter maybe from the previous boot camp, and can they use Delphi? And Jim, you did a blog post, but there was sort of a workaround thing, I guess it was, for having both starters or not?
Yes, that's correct. What you do is if you already have one installed, essentially what you do is you go into the license manager, which is in the folder that the binary is for the IDE. So it's going to be Embarcadero Studio 18.0/bin or something like that. But you'll find a program called License Manager, and you run that, and you add the license for Delphi or C++ Builder, whichever one you don't have installed yet. So if you've already got C++ installed, you'd say add, and you'd add the Starter Edition license, and you'd register that license, and then you would run the feature installer again. So this doesn't work with the ISO, the full ISO. It works with the feature installer, which is the one that David showed in the video, and the one that you get downloaded with the Starter Edition. And you run that, and it'll say, hey, you've already got C++ Builder installed. Would you like to install Delphi now? And you say yes, and then it'll go through the process. It's pretty quick because it's already got a lot of the stuff installed, and it'll install it and be good to go. And I did that and had a few people report that it worked fine for them too. So it's not officially supported, but it is, like I said, does seem to work.
There were a couple of questions about can you use Delphi to build web apps, and there is a web broker component that and a wizard that's part of Pro and Edition and Higher that lets you build web server apps, either CGI or a SAP DLL apps, or if you've got Apache, you can also use Apache modules. And Marco Cantu has a blog post and did a skill sprint about that. There was another, so that's Pro Edition and above. Again, the Starter Edition is to get you started building Win32 desktop apps using FireMonkey, but then as you follow along with us the rest of this week, especially on Friday, we'll give you a look and see what you can do by starting with FireMonkey on Win32 with the starter. And then as you upgrade to Pro and Mobile Add-on Pack or Enterprise and above, then you can take that same source code, just choose another target platform and recompile the same source code and have it run on Win64, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. So more about that on Wednesday with FireMonkey and on Friday with mobile development. And again, 2D and 3D graphics, you'll see all of that through FireMonkey and game development on Thursday and so on. Somebody asked if they can build desktop apps and also embed HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We do have a T web browser component, and you can load up that web browser from a local file that could have HTML and then reference CSS, but it's not an HTML, sorry, it's not an HTML development environment. But you can see if you file other, and then there's some additional files where you can open up and edit HTML files, CSS files, do whatever you want, text files, and so on. So there is a file open for that. Just file open other ... in the menu that shows up when you do the file menu, and down there you can check the different tab settings for the types of files that you want to open. Somebody asked if they could create a COM server and COM client, COM being, or COM being a Windows-only technology, really. And I put the link in the Q&A log to the doc wiki that shows how you can do COM programming, connect to a COM server, do a COM client, COM server, deal with type libraries, all of those kinds of things. That's fully supported via the language. Actually, when Delphi started early on, even before Microsoft added COM Plus, where you had to do the Dawn box hard way to do COM programming, where you had to write a lot of code, Delphi first added interfaces in Delphi 3, and that interface and interface reference counting was all taken care of for you in Delphi 3 to make COM programming easier. And then later on, we removed the Windows COM portion of interfaces so you could have interfaces in anything. And Marco Cantu will cover interfaces in the programming language session tomorrow, I'm sure. But you can do COM development using Delphi. Someone asked about 64-bit. Again, the starter edition is Win32 targeting only. If you upgrade to the Pro version or and above, we also give you a target platform Win64. We give you 64-bit compiler and linker, a Mac OS, an iOS ARM, and an Android ARM compiler. All the IDE runs on Windows. The IDE is a Win32 application, but it uses a large memory model. So if you're running on Win64, and you've got gigabytes of memory, the IDE will use more memory than just the 32-bit address space.
to let you have larger projects if you're building, really huge things. So the IDE relies on running on Windows. When I do development, because someone else asked, can I just do iOS and Mac OS development? And the answer is yes, if you have the Pro, Enterprise, or the mobile add-on pack and above. The IDE still runs on Windows. So what I use Parallels for the Macintosh, Parallels Desktop for the Mac, running on my MacBook Pro, and then I have a Windows 10 and a Windows 7 guest operating system in separate VMs so that I can do my development on Windows, but then again, target, you'll see more about all of that on Friday, for example, how to deploy your applications to an iOS device via a Macintosh and so on. Let's see, about somebody asked about styles. I didn't show styles specifically here because I think it's Jim and Daniele on Wednesday with the FireMonkey deep dive will talk about form factors and how you deal with different resolutions and different size devices on mobile on Friday, but you can styles to have a dark style or a Tron transparent style or other custom styles. We have in the registry user download area some premium styles, some extra style files besides the default. So if you run on Windows, we give you the Windows look and feel by default in a FireMonkey app, but you can use a component called the style book. You drop the style book down and then you associate it with a style file, and then you can have whatever look you want, including your own custom look for the user interface with your own custom color. Right, Jim?
Right, correct. And there's some questions here from the YouTube channel I'm going to address real quick. One of them is what is the difference between VCL and FireMonkey, and is asking if VCL is deprecated or FireMonkey is the future. The one thing about that is we're still planning to continue supporting VCL. In the last few releases, we've added new features to VCL, new components to VCL. And as long as there's Windows, because VCL is tied specifically to Windows, there will continue to be VCL. Now, FireMonkey is originally designed to be cross-platform, so it's the framework we use in Pro with mobile to address cross-platform development on Mac OS X, on iOS, and Android. And so what it does allows you to design your UI once and hit all those platforms. And that's something we're going to talk about in detail on Friday with the stepping up to mobile and databases. So the difference, though, is that FireMonkey is essentially all owner draw. It has its own libraries in there that use the GPU to draw it. And so that's the executables will be a little larger, but the user interface controls are a little more flexible because of the way they're handled. For example, you can nest anything in FireMonkey. You have more granular control of sizing and effects and all sorts of really powerful features. So you'll find that some apps are more suited to FireMonkey and some apps are more suited to VCL if you're only doing Windows development. But one is not better than the other, and one is not deprecated. It's just a matter of having two choices. There's a question here about 64-bit version of the IDE. So the IDE is 32-bit, but it does support large memory model. So on a 64-bit OS with more than 4 gigs of RAM, it's able to address more RAM and use more RAM and deal with the RAM it needs, use the RAM it needs to have. Recreating an entire 64-bit IDE is a huge undertaking. It's something that they're considering, but as far as I know, it's not on the roadmap at this point. But the IDE is able to address large memory and use more than the traditional 4 gigabytes. So there's a question here, is it possible to use native access to all the Windows APIs in features like COM, DCOM, OLE, etc. with FireMonkey? So it is. That's one thing that's great about Delphi is it gives you these great rich components and stuff and libraries that you can use at this high level to get a lot of work done. But if you do want to reach down and grab a Windows API or grab a COM component or whatever it is, that's all available to you as well. So it's one of those things, best case scenario, you're getting a lot of work done because you're using these components, but worst case scenario, you end up writing code like you're in Visual C++ and you have to go down and touch all those APIs. Most of the time you don't need to do that, but if you need to, it's available to you. There's a framework called Crosstalk that makes it easy to, for example, talk to .NET, the .NET framework, and consume .NET objects. There's a Java bridge that lets you consume Java. Really, you can get anywhere. Usually you don't have to, and that's the great thing. One note about FireMonkey is because FireMonkey is designed to green cross-platform, is if you are planning in the future to move to other platforms, you want to be aware of the fact that if you are grabbing any Windows APIs today, that those APIs will not work on other platforms. All right, David, you want to go back and do some questions? I'll see what else I got over here.
Yeah, there's a question here about like speed comparisons between a native Xcode app versus a Delphi app, and we use the same back-end code emitter and optimizer for multi-platforms. There'll be a discussion of that on Friday. So they're very comparable, and they're using the same optimizations if you're comparing like language constructs and like algorithms and use cases. So.
Yeah, and we have customers that we've done case studies with that have started down the path that were like, well, we think we're going to need Xcode because we really need some high performance. And they started using Xcode. They're like, man, this is a lot of work. Maybe we should give Delphi a shot. And they try it in Delphi, and they're like, wow, we can get done quicker, and our app performs just the same as Xcode. Now, that being said, I guarantee you can find a use case in where Xcode will be faster, and you can find a use case in where Delphi will be faster. That's just the nature of tests. So generally speaking, you're going to be more productive with Delphi, but performance-wise, like David said, we're using the same back-end emitter. We're both using ARC, automatic reference counting, for memory management. So you're probably 99% of the time, it's going to be negligible speed performance differences between the two. So there's a question, someone saying that they're trying to build an app, but they got the debug app. So they built their executable with the IDE, and they got the debug version. Over on the right-hand side, there'll be a drop-down in the project manager window where you can change it from debug to release mode.
That's
and you just change that.
The build configuration node. Just right-mouse click on the build configuration node or expand it, and you can choose between debug and release. Somebody else was asking how easy it is to move an old Delphi app forward. It depends on how old. If it's before the Delphi 2009 where strings became Unicode strings, and there's maybe a little bit of work if you're playing fast and loose with string types, using them as message buffers and other things, and pointers. There may be a 32-bit versus 64-bit kind of thing. As far as media converter is concerned, it'll convert the form files from VCL to FireMonkey and convert the code. So separate from any Unicode, for example, things or some other suspicious programming practices, it should just convert right over from VCL to FireMonkey. So check out MediaConverter.com, and it's got all the details, and there's documentation that you can take a look at, as well as some screen demos.
Yeah, but you're welcome to keep using VCL, and we do have a webinar coming up later next month, I believe, that's going to talk about migrating, and it's going to talk about Unicode conversion as well as FireDAC. So BDE has been deprecated, so if you're using BDE previously, you'll want to move to FireDAC. You can still download BDE as a separate download, but FireDAC is so much better. It's just amazing how awesome FireDAC is, to be honest. And there are so many things. I've been doing database app development for years, and there's so many things I've wished I could do for so long that FireDAC makes so easy, and it's just it's beautiful. It really is. And so you can migrate from BDE to FireDAC. We have tools for that. You can use those same tools if you're using like DBGo or some other framework to migrate to FireDAC as well. But yeah, we have a webinar coming up with for that as well, and that will help you with the migration. But a lot of people have migrated no problem, and it really depends on some of your coding practices and stuff like that as far as how much effort's involved in migration. We do have a utility for Unicode migration that will tell you kind of what you need to look at in your migration process to give you a good idea of how much is necessary. That's our that'll be covered in the webinar that's coming up.
Somebody was asking about, do we use emulators in FireMonkey, and the answer is no. We use native code. For 2D, we go and do
With FireMonkey for bitmaps and so on, we use DirectX, and for 3D, we use Direct 3D on Windows. For Android and iOS, we use the native 2D APIs, so Cocoa on Mac, and just the NDK native API on Android. You can always get to the native APIs as well. And then for 3D, we use OpenGL on macOS and OpenGLES on iOS and Android. So it's all native code, uses the GPU for all the image processing, for all the 3D transformations and everything else. Delphi supports the iOS simulator on Apple. If you have the mobile support, you can run your application on an Android emulator, but that's pretty slow in general. But everything is native code, and it goes right to the hardware, right to the processor, right to the GPU.
There's a question here about using CNPAC in Berlin, and yeah, that works. I know a lot of people that can't live without CNPAC, and they use it and are very happy with it in Berlin. G-Experts as well, and there's a few other ones out there. They all are working with Berlin. Oh, yeah, here's another question. Can G-Experts be installed? And yes, you can install it in the Starter Edition as well. The only limit, there's 2 limits to Starter Edition. The 2 biggest limits to Starter Edition, let's put it that way, is no database support and no mobile platforms. There's a few other smaller, minor ones, like app tethering is not available in Starter Edition, the REST framework is not available in Starter Edition because those fall into the data umbrella. But a couple of those minor IDE things, but for the most part, the rest of the stuff's going to work. And the cool thing is, and I occasionally get someone saying, well, you can't do anything with Starter Edition. That's not true. And on day 4, we're going to show game development in Starter Edition, and these are some really cool games that you're going to see that completely you're able to download the code and run them all in Starter Edition, no problem. And lots of other great functionality as long as you're targeting Windows. And then day 5, we'll talk about how you can prototype your mobile app on Windows with Starter Edition. And once you've got that all put together and you're ready to go, then you can upgrade to Pro with mobile add-on and hit the ground running and be ready to just build and do the final testing on the mobile devices. So you can get a lot done in Starter Edition.
Someone was asking more about database development. Again, the Starter Edition is for building desktop app, games apps, game apps, and so on. The Pro Edition with the mobile add-on pack or the Enterprise Edition has the Pro with the FireDAC client server add-on pack or the Enterprise Edition lets you get to SQL databases both locally and remotely. And that uses the FireDAC components that work with both VCL and FireMonkey applications. So there's always the question about, is there a client API on a certain platform that we can connect to? Because FireDAC goes through client APIs. So if you've got a client library that you can install on the platform, like on my machine, I've got Microsoft SQL Server Client, MySQL Client, I've got SQL Server EX for local testing. I've got Oracle EX or whatever it's called these days on my machine, so I can hit local Oracle. I've got Interbase Server and Interbase Desktop and IB Lite, which is our Interbase free to deploy a database. I can hit all of those locally with Pro, and then with the client server unpack or Enterprise, I can talk to remote databases. The specific question was about, can you get to Microsoft SQL Server by using a Mac OS application? And I don't know if Microsoft provides a Mac OS client library for SQL Server, so you may have to build a multi-tier application having your Mac app talk to some Windows server that has the Microsoft SQL Server client talking to either a local or remote SQL database. You might check with Microsoft SQL Server and see if I'm reading in that you've got, when you say SQL Server, that should mean Microsoft. If you want to talk to a SQL database, there's SQL databases that run on Mac OS, and you can use FireDAC to talk to those, whether it's Interbase, Postgres, and so on, MySQL. Let's see. When we access Windows CE Smart Device, we don't do Windows CE, we don't do Windows Mobile currently. It's something we're watching and looking at, but it's a small market,
percentage compared to iOS and Android. So that's why we started supporting iOS and Androids first. iOS and Android, as well as Mac OS and Windows. The next platform we're targeting is Linux Server. So that's really the next step along the way.
So I just checked, and FireDAC does support SQL Server from Mac. If you go to the doc wiki and look up connecting to Microsoft SQL Server with FireDAC, it has an entry that says Mac OS 10 client software, and explains what you need to deploy and what you need to install in order to connect to SQL Server with FireDAC from Mac OS 10.
Do you have a link there, Jim, or?
I do, and I don't see the question, but I'll put it in the chat window, and if you want to paste it in the question window.
Sure, I could do that. Okay.
Jumping between all these different channels here, I don't see that question.
No, it's okay. No problem. I'll copy and paste it in the Q&A log. So it's in the chat window about SQL Server OS X, OS 10, whatever, Mac OS now, I guess is the new name. And I put that in the Q&A for the questioner as well. How to install packages when there's no Get It in Seattle version? Well, Seattle version has Get It, and Berlin added functionality for Get It. So it's under Get It Package Manager under the Tools menu.
Yeah, and then you can install packages without Get It as well. Just install them like have you done in previous versions as well. So lots of options for installing packages. You can use Get It, you can go without Get It, you can
Yep, there are other ways to install packages, absolutely. Install and use packages. Just go into the doc wiki and search for package files, and it'll show you how to work with packages, how to create packages, how to reuse them, and so on. Let's see. People are asking about how to migrate to FireMonkey. Somebody has a VCL Delphi 2007 app. Again, use the Media Converter. It'll convert the form files and your source code. There might be, again, issues with third-party components you might be using and or the Unicode string change. But otherwise, yeah, check out Media Converter.
Sorry about that. I clicked in the Facebook page to answer some questions there, and it unmuted and the audio came in, so that was a little echo there.
Okay. Somebody asked about how to put your own components in Get It for internal. We don't have that functionality right now. It's something that's being looked at, the idea of having your own kind of local Get It repository. Right now, the way Get It works is it goes out to one of our servers, multiple servers, and pulls down what's available so you can see it, and then you can choose things. So stay tuned for incarnations of Get It to come. It's definitely requested. You could put a request for that functionality or a vote for it if it's probably already there in quality.embarcadero.com. That's our quality portal.
Yeah, someone's commenting about some DB grid behavior in an earlier version. I'm not sure specifically what that is, but I know that the DB grid did have some stuff changed on it recently, and so definitely check it out in Berlin if it's been a while since you've used it and see if it's fixed. And if it's not fixed, then like David said, just put an issue in quality.embarcadero.com. It's amazing how often I run into people that are like, oh, you guys aren't fixing this one issue. And it's like, well, did you put it in quality? And they're like, no, but you know about it, right? And I'm like, no, never heard about it. There's so much to Delphi that it's just not possible for somebody to have tested and visited every use case and scenario. But if you put it in quality, then we can know about it and we can prioritize getting it fixed. I'm not saying everything will get addressed or changed like you want it to, but if you don't put it in quality, then we don't know about it and aren't able to get it fixed. Let's see. Why don't we have an IDE for other platforms? We don't have an IDE for the platforms just because it's a huge undertaking to maintain an IDE on multiple platforms because of the fact that our IDE develops native code and hooks into the OS for debugging purposes. That's a huge undertaking. There's lots of code editors out there, especially tools that will develop like Java apps or web apps or something like that, because those don't require the hooks into the OS for debugging purposes. And so that's kind of the differentiations. One of the things that why we don't have an IDE on multiple platforms. That may change in the future, but for right now, we don't have that on the roadmap to have IDEs on the platforms.
Yeah. Somebody's asking about discounts for startups. Just contact our sales offices or reselling partners, depending on where you are in the world, and see what they might do. We don't have any published discounts for startups. The starter edition, which is free right now, is really for indie developers, nonprofit developers, those kinds of things. Maybe you're doing a startup, you want to get started, make a little money, and then upgrade to Pro, make some more money, upgrade to Enterprise, and so on. So that's sort of the process, and the starter edition is the getting started for indie development and individuals that are learning programming.
Actually, right now, it's kind of this perfect storm, if you will. Because Starter Edition is, everybody's on here is able to get a free license for Starter Edition. Usually, Starter Edition is like $280. So we have upgrade pricing from Starter to Pro that gives you a discount when you make that upgrade, because assuming you've already paid for Starter. But since Starter is now free, then you got that discount for free if you want to upgrade to Pro right now. And to top it off, we have a bonus where if you upgrade to Pro, you get the mobile add-on for free. So it's like three great opportunities all collided together here at once. It was actually, we were on a meeting the other day and someone said, wait a second, we're giving Starter away for free. Don't people get an upgrade discount pricing going to Pro? And they're like, yeah, they do. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's pretty awesome. So it is just kind of worked out that you can take advantage of this great opportunity. So if you're like, I'd really like to do mobile stuff, do it now, upgrade, because you can get that discount pricing on Pro from Starter and get the free mobile add-on. That's a promotion we're doing right now. That's not usually that case. Usually that's an additional upgrade. So you're able to get a really, really great deal on that right now. So there's comments about parallel programming. The new parallel programming library, the new T-threading library that we introduced in XE8, I think it was, just recently, is a huge step forward in parallel programming. If you've previously done parallel programming with system.thread, this is total night and day difference as far as simplicity. With system.thread, when you create a T-thread, when you create a T-thread object, you're actually creating a actual thread that you have to manage. It's a system resource. With a task, which is what is used in the threading, you're creating a unit of work, and then you put that unit of work into the thread pool, and then the framework manages that thread pool for you. You put your unit of work in the thread pool, and it executes across different threads, and then when it's done, you can be notified or whatever. So much easier to debug, such a huge step forward. It's easier to code, easier to debug, easier to maintain, and better performance options. You can still use the regular T-threading if you want to, but you don't have to. That's one thing I love about Delphi, is it gives you these different options of ways to attack things and get things done, and you can choose whatever works best for your current situation. And I just saw the time. We're actually over time, aren't we?
Yeah, there was just a quick question came in just a moment ago about, can you work with INI files with Starter Edition? And the answer is yes, you can. You also can use just regular file-based files built into the language. You can use text files, and you can use just block read, block write, regular files, and do your record-based storage for your own data without having a SQL database or some other kind of database. You can read and write text files using readln and writeln in the Delphi/Pascal programming language. I do that a lot to create things like CSV text files. That's the old style. Just search for writeln, W-R-I-T-L-N. First parameter, you pass it a file variable, whether that's a text file or a file of record. and you can do that, and then you can use the INI library to create and read INI files as storage elements as well.
So I want to do a quick thanks to a lot of the people in the YouTube channel that have been helping answer questions. There's a number of people here that are helping answer peer-to-peer questions, which I really appreciate. That's one thing. We have a great community out there of other developers that are always happy to help. You can find some of them on community.embarcadero.com. So if you have a question you didn't get answered today, visit community.embarcadero.com. You can get your question answered there. Or another great resource is Stack Overflow. There's also communities on Google+, LinkedIn, and Facebook that you can join as well, but I found those two are probably the easiest to get into and get answers on. So